Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for Roadmap Webinar 201, Natural History, Power of the Patient Experience, Translating Natural History Data into Research Breakthroughs. I'm Ricky Safer, a PSC patient and CEO of PSC Partners Seeking a Cure. Tonight, we are really excited to unveil PSC Partners' new Natural History Initiative, now referred to by the acronym WIND. Worldwide Integration of Natural History Databases. In tonight's session, patients will learn how patient participation in natural history studies drives PSC research and drug development. The impetus for starting this initiative was patient feedback about the unmet need to identify new treatment options to stop progression of PSC. After tonight's webinar, if you'd like to learn more about our WIND initiative, please go to the research tab on our website, where we have a basic review of all of tonight's information. Thank you to the sponsors of our Roadmap initiative, Albireo, Intercept, Escient, Mirum, and CIMABay. Next slide, please. This is our 10th and last webinar of the Roadmap Initiative, leading up to our virtual Patient Caregiver Conference on June 2nd through 5th, and we hope you will all join us. The 4 topics that we had covered are patient-reported outcome measures, research, drug development, and natural history. We've reached our goal of accelerating progress to find therapies and a cure by educating the patient community on the research landscape, broadening the researcher base and strengthening multi-stakeholder communication, and creating opportunities for researchers and clinicians to engage in meaningful discussions with an informed patient community. All past Roadmap webinars are recorded on our website if you'd like to go hear them. Next slide, please. For today's agenda, we will start off with presentations by Mary Vyas, President of PSC Partners Canada, and Dr. Ruth-Anne, Director of Research Strategy at PSC Partners, followed by a panel discussion with Drs. Chris Bowlus, Gideon Hirschfield, and Cynthia Levy, all members of our WIND working group and also our Scientific Medical Advisory Committee. Now, I'm pleased to turn it over to Mary Vyas. Take it away, Mary.
Thank you, Ricky. And good evening to everybody here with us. I'd like to start off with a reiteration of the announcement. PSC Partners is launching a natural history project that we are describing as Worldwide Integration of Natural History Databases, and we'll be calling PSC Partners WIND. My objective in this part of the webinar is to describe the WIND initiative in very general terms. Ruth-Anne will follow with more scientific and specific detail. Next slide, please. So what is WIND? In very simplest terms, WIND is an initiative that is PSC Partners led, PSC Partners sponsored to launch PSC data collection. Okay, so WIND will be creating a database. Very fortunately for PSC, there are many significant efforts around the world where PSC data is already being collected and studied. So what is WIND adding to these efforts? The WIND database will serve as a central location where PSC natural history data is securely shared with PSC partners and with the broader PSC research community. Medical centers from around the world will be invited to contribute by enrolling patients and collecting and contributing clinician-reported natural history data. Data will be integrated from existing databases in different countries, thereby amplifying their power by facilitating consistent, comprehensive, and monitored data collection, aiming to ultimately support and accelerate drug development for PSC. Next slide, please. Let's back up. Again, in the simplest terms, WIND is an initiative to create a database of certain PSC data collected and monitored in very specific ways. The types of data to be collected are called natural history data. For those who attended the Natural History 101 Roadmap session last month, you've already been introduced to this idea of natural history. Natural history refers to the usual course of a disease over time. When PSC natural history is captured, patients are followed over time as their PSC progresses. And with the patient's consent, important data such as treatments, complications, test results, interventions, and more can be stored securely in a natural history database. So why is the natural history of PSC important? Well, natural history studies are crucial to PSC research. Collecting and monitoring natural history data in very specific ways will support the researchers and the drug developers in reaching the ultimate goal of getting the right treatment to the right PSC patients at the right time. For more on natural history studies in general, you can view last month's Roadmap Natural History 101 session and the educational materials for that session, all which can be found on the Roadmap page of the PSC Partners website. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the difference between a patient registry and a natural history database. Again, remember, in the simplest terms, this WIND initiative will be a database of certain PSC data collected and monitored in very specific ways. You could say the same of the PSC Partners patient registry. The main difference between a natural history database, such as what we're hoping to build with WIND, and a patient registry are the types of data and how the data is captured. The PSC Partners patient registry is a database that collects patient-reported data. PSC patients respond to surveys about their medical history and ideally update the surveys periodically or when something changes. A natural history database such as WIND will include pre-planned, systematic, and regular collection of past or current data from medical records, including such things as imaging data, hospitalization records, and lab test results. These data will be reported by the medical team. The systematic capture of these health data over time is key to enabling the completion of natural history studies. And if collected and monitored in very specific ways, may serve important purposes for drug development, which you will hear more about in a moment. Before we move on, please note that the language used around these efforts can be confusing. You may hear the term registry used for a natural history database, or the term database used for what we are calling our patient registry. For the purposes of the communications from PSC Partners, we will use the term registry when speaking of the patient-reported patient registry, and the term WIND database or WIND natural history when speaking of the collection of PSC Partners-sponsored natural history data. There are other important PSC research efforts that may use the term registry differently. Next slide, please. So why did PSC Partners take on such an ambitious project, and why is it so important? Well, 2020 was a time when the FDA's growing emphasis on the patient's voice in drug development inspired PSC Partners to act upon this important focus on patient input. It was a ripe time for PSC Partners to apply for the competitive and substantial Rare as One grant. We were awarded this grant along with 29 other rare disease organizations. One mandate with this grant has been to develop a patient-driven collaborative research network. Patient-driven research has meant that PSC Partners has been listening to our community and basing its strategic research plan on what the patients consider to be most important to them. PSC Partners sponsored research initiatives, such as the PSC Partners WIND, are important outcomes of this collaborative network approach. And if you attend the June conference, you will hear a lot more about both the strategic research plan and the collaborative network approach. You may remember the Our Voices survey and the PSC Partners PFDD meeting with the FDA, a meeting that introduced the PSC patient journey to the FDA and to drug developers. 850 patients responded to the PSC Partners call to take the survey that captured the many aspects of the PSC patient experience. And it was loud and clear in the responses that overwhelmingly patients prioritize developments of treatments to slow down the progression of their PSC. With the collaboration of all stakeholders, including patients, PSC Partners aims to support the acceleration of PSC drug development, keeping in focus priorities identified by patients. By developing WIND, we as PSC patients and patient representatives can serve as custodians of our own data and can pursue the explicit and important goal of sharing this data with any researcher pursuing ethical and approved PSC research. The very difficult journeys PSC patients experience because they don't have any approved treatment are key to understanding PSC. Not to collect this lived experience in a way that it can be used is to miss a precious opportunity to advance our understanding of PSC. Today, we are most grateful for the clinical trials that are exploring potential treatments for PSC. We are also grateful to all the patients who are joining clinical trials at their earliest safety testing stages and primary efficacy testing stages. With WIND, we aim to support these efforts by being ready to optimize the chances for success of full approval of a drug by supporting the lengthy and challenging later phases of drug approval. And I'd also like to say we thank the generous donors who have understood the importance of these initiatives and have committed to 5 years of funding for this to launch this project. Next slide, please. Before I turn over the presentation to Ruth-Anne, who will be giving more detail and more scientific content about this project, I'd like to take a moment to discuss the name WIND and the logo that PSC Partners has selected for this project. First, in alignment with the invitation for participation in WIND from around the world, a sincere thank you to our friend Espen Bunes from Norway, who contributed his design skills in creating the beautiful logo. Next, we realize that using the word worldwide to describe this effort is aspirational. As you'll hear from Ruth-Anne, when we launch, there will be a limited number of participating research sites. However, sites will certainly be beyond the US only. Funds are not infinite. Nevertheless, we elected to stick with the term worldwide because it is our hope that this project and data can reflect our intention to unite over the unmet needs of PSCers worldwide. We also recognize there are multiple interpretations of the name WIND. We are absolutely invested in this undertaking. We make the announcement of this initiative following lengthy and serious study. We've been so fortunate to work with an incredible working group of scientific advisors who Ruth-Anne will shortly tell you more about. We've also spent a great deal of time learning from other patient groups about their challenges and successes with natural history studies. And we've been paying very close attention to the changes in the regulatory environment and regulatory guidance around the use of real-world data in drug development. We see the name PSC Partners WIND as representing this initiative ultimately as a force that will lift us and help propel the field towards effective treatments for those living with PSC. And if you look at the logo, you will see a W with an implicit E and an embedded WIN. Together, we are in this fight, and together, we will be closer to a win. And now please welcome Ruth-Anne Pye, Director of Research Strategy for PSC Partners.
Thank you so much, Mary. I am so excited to be here with you all tonight, and will now shift our focus to be a bit more technical as I walk through the scientific aims and approach for the WIND cohort of PSC patients. Next slide, please. As Mary mentioned, through conversations with the working group, we discussed a number of potential needs and strategies for how we could all work together to support the PSC community. These included efforts to identify biomarkers, develop an external control arm, understand heterogeneity, or track and study off-label drug use of drugs that aren't yet approved to treat PSC. Next slide, please. Having had these open and informal conversations with the working group, at PSC Partners, we then developed a survey asking the working group members to identify the most important areas to address right now in our work together. The responses really aligned with what we at PSC Partners feel are the most important needs for the patient community. First, the identification of biomarkers that are acceptable to the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and the European EMA for conditional drug approval. And second, the creation of a patient cohort to serve as the placebo arm for required confirmatory trials. I'll go into a lot more detail on what these are and why they're important in just a bit. Next slide, please. But first, I want to highlight another area that was discussed and that PSC Partners brought forward as a third objective. This is the incorporation of patient-reported data into clinical trials, which is so important for patient-focused drug development. And so it was important to include this as an objective for the WIND initiative. Everyone here tonight may also recognize that no one knows the experience of living with PSC better than our PSC patients. And through this WIND aim of capturing changes in symptom burden, function, and quality of life over 5 years as PSC progresses, we will inform the design and success of future clinical trials. Next slide, please. Next, I would like to share a few of the PSC Partners' core values related to the WIND initiative. Mary has mentioned these already, but they're also central to the development of a scientific protocol and our scientific approach. First, PSC Partners will sponsor the launch of this effort, and PSC Partners will commit $4 million in community funding to the recruitment of approximately 2,000 patients. And we are so very grateful for the support of our community funders. Second, we will not recreate efforts. Instead, the data that are collected as part of the WIND cohort will support ongoing research priorities, but also be shared into a database, as Mary mentioned. As sponsors and stewards, PSC Partners will hold the rights to the use and distribution of the data in this centralized database. And this is important to us because as stewards of the data and advocates for PSC patients, we aim to ensure safe and effective use of the data to meet the needs of our patient community. But we won't be alone in deciding when and where to share data. A data access committee comprised of external and internal members will review research requests. Third, PSC Partners is committed to ensuring future use and easy access to data, with the potential to expand the database after the initial 5-year follow-up. We will consider future pharma sponsorship for these long-term goals, including data use and external control arms. Next slide, please. Now let's talk a little bit about what the WIND initiative will look like. Our primary objective is to develop a prospective natural history cohort that is sufficiently powered to understand biomarkers and to enable the development of external control arms for clinical trials. We plan to enroll 2,000 PSC patients across all research sites into the WIND cohort. And a key piece here of this being a prospective study is that we'll be following PSC patients on their journey for 5 years to start after they enroll in the study. Next slide, please. So PSC Partners is pursuing an aggressive timeline to accomplish the goals of WIND. While the dates will depend on various factors coming together over the next year, I'd like to share our best estimate for each phase. Beginning this month, March 2022, we'll start drafting the WIND protocol with expert researchers in the working group, and we'll also begin pursuing data sharing agreements with research sites. In June 2022, at the PSC Partners annual conference from June 3rd to 4th, we'll discuss a draft of the WIND protocol, all of us together, patients and caregivers, researchers, and clinicians. In early 2023, we hope to complete contracting with individual sites and begin enrolling PSC patients at participating research centers. And this enrollment will take some time, but by early 2025, we aim to complete enrollment of the 2,000 patients into WIND. Data collection and follow-up time is also important. In early 2027, we'll have enough time points and data from enough PSC patient experiences to begin interim analyses and also begin using this data to support drug development. Then in early 2030, we aim to complete the 5-year follow-up and pursue additional directions for WIND. At PSC Partners, we are hopeful that this initial investment will trigger continued funding and efforts ongoing from 2030, and we may expand our efforts and leverage WIND to address additional needs of the PSC patient community. Now, for the rest of the time today, I'll focus our attention on the first 2 stages on this timeline, the preparation of our scientific protocol and the launch of patient recruitment at individual sites. Next slide, please. So these efforts would not be possible without the support of many researchers with the expertise and experience of developing their own natural history cohorts and studies. Many of them are here tonight and will join us in our breakout rooms. Mary mentioned the working group earlier, and I'd like to briefly acknowledge our working group regional leads. Representing the US, Canada, and Europe are Dr. Cynthia Levy, Dr. Gideon Hirschfield, and Dr. Cyril Poncione. These regional leads provide crucial guidance on the development of this effort and on the unique needs of each region. They're a part of our larger prospective cohort working group of 15 members, which has now met 4 times to provide feedback and guidance on the direction of the WIND initiative. We are very excited to have a working group member, Dr. Bowlus, here with us tonight to join in the panel discussion in just a few minutes. And finally, PSC Partners will seek guidance and direction from industry and from regulatory agencies over the next few months to ensure we meet the needs of drug developers as we develop the protocol and the WIND cohort. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to walk us through some specifics of the WIND protocol. This is very scientific and dense, but we'll get through it together. So we'll begin by discussing the scientific aims. Our first aim is to develop a large biomarker data set with the aim of identifying associations with clinical endpoints. In order to address this aim, we'll ask a number of questions. For example, do biomarker measurements collected over time associate with clinical endpoints like cirrhosis and transplant? Do newly developed composite endpoints, meaning a collection of more than one biomarker, associate with these clinical endpoints? Do newly discovered serum or plasma biomarkers associated with clinical endpoints? Here we aim to perform research to identify new biomarkers that haven't even been considered yet. And finally, does prospective sample collection allow for mechanistic research studies as follow-up? Next slide, please. Our next aim, aim 2, involves data collection to enable the creation of external control arms. If we're successful in developing the external control arm through the WIND initiative, our hope is that few or no patients in that confirmatory trial would be randomized to receive placebo. So that's confusing. So let me take a step back and explain what this means. In order to meet this goal, we'll need a rigorous scientific approach. First, we'll ask whether the systematic capture of the natural history of PSC and disease progression provides sufficient data to serve as an external control arm in a confirmatory clinical trial. We also need to determine whether safety signals and other events that we would expect to occur over the course of a clinical trial can be captured sufficiently through this prospective data set to satisfy FDA requirements for the safety data in a traditional placebo arm. So what does this mean? At PSC Partners, we recognize that this is a very complex topic and it is our greatest challenge for the WIND initiative, but we also feel it reflects the greatest potential to support PSC patients. The data from this cohort most likely will not be able to replace the placebo arm in a clinical trial taking place before a drug is approved, such as a phase 2 or phase 3 trial. But once a drug is approved for PSC, our doctors are able to prescribe it to us and we can pick it up at our pharmacy. At the same time, the FDA may require a phase 4 or confirmatory clinical trial, which will enroll patients to receive either the drug or a placebo, and then follow them over time to confirm the drug is safe and effective. As I mentioned before, if we're successful in developing the external control arm through the WIND initiative, few or no patients in that confirmatory trial would be randomized to receive the placebo, and that's our goal. Next slide, please. So our third and final aim, aim 3, is to ask whether patient-reported outcome data can serve as a validated measure of PSC progression in the context of a clinical trial. As I mentioned earlier, the incorporation of patient-reported data into clinical trials is so important for patient-focused drug development. But scientifically, these tools need to be developed and tested rigorously with input from many PSC patients to be fit for purpose. Through the WIND cohort, we'll ask the following questions. Can the capture of prospective quality of life data enable the study of PSC symptoms and quality of life longitudinally during disease progression? What is the overall impact of PSC symptoms and clinical features on quality of life? And can we validate PRO measurements in multiple languages? Next slide, please. Now I've described the 3 scientific aims, but there are a few other aspects of the protocol that are important for us to discuss. The first is to discuss which patient data will be collected. What will this look like for the PSC patients and for the clinicians who are involved in this initiative? So it's important to collect information across 3 major areas. First, we'll need to measure potential biomarkers for aim 1. So some examples to collect these biomarkers would be regular blood tests and imaging like FibroScan and MRCP. We'll also need to capture clinical events that are associated with PSC for all of the aims. Some examples here include progression to cirrhosis and complications like cholangitis or varices. Third, we'll need to collect targeted retrospective data, meaning data from the past medical records. Examples here include a confirmation of PSC diagnosis, fibrosis stage, and a history of interventions like ERCP. Next slide, please. We also need to consider how frequently these data should be collected. Currently, most natural history registries collect data either annually or biannually. For this, the clinician researchers may ask their PSC patients to return to the office for their routine follow-up on a specific schedule. In the case of the WIND cohort, we will need PSC patients to follow up a bit more regularly after enrollment. We imagine patients going to their medical center or to their doctor biannually for 5 years of follow-up, or at least 10 times over 5 years. The frequency of follow-up is especially important for the second aim, the external control arm. We may need to collect some data elements every 3 months. And in order to determine the best course of action as we're developing this protocol, PSC partners will seek guidance on what, how, and when data should be collected. In particular, we welcome feedback, especially with regards to the frequency of follow-up and the methods to capture clinical events. At the end of the day, we aim to collect natural history data that reflects the patient characteristics and clinical data that are collected in a future clinical trial. And this is no easy feat, but one that we can strive for together as a PSC community. Next slide, please. Between now and early 2023, PSC partners will pursue formal relationships and contracts with research sites interested in contributing to the WIND cohort. A large portion of our $4 million in funding will be used to support these sites in recruitment and data collection. As we select sites, a number of factors will be considered, including the success and rigor of previous efforts, the ability of these sites to collect biospecimens, patient demographics and disease stage with an aim for diversity, the ability to follow up for 5 to 7 years and collect all data elements, and also input from consortium representatives, working group members, and regional leads. We are very excited to begin exploring potential collaborations, and we welcome anyone interested to reach out to us to start the conversation. Next slide, please. Now, there are many more details that I wish I had time to share with you all today, but I'll close by sharing what makes us at PSC Partners so excited to begin this journey with you all. PSC Partners has been so inspired by ongoing biomarker efforts across continents. There is so much potential to uncover new and important opportunities to provide non-invasive testing to PSC patients over the coming years. We found so much hope and potential in our conversations with the FDA around external control arms. There is so much potential for our PSC patient data to support drug development. We are so grateful for the dedication of international PSC researchers who already have been collecting natural history data for years across multiple ongoing prospective and retrospective cohorts. And with these last 2 bullet points, I'd like to say a special thank you to all who have inspired and supported the development of WIND. We are endlessly inspired by the dedication of PSC patients to research and in the pursuit of treatments and a cure for all living with PSC. And lastly, PSC Partners is so grateful to the Prospective Cohort Working Group for their continued dedication and partnership with us. Without the collective expertise and guidance of the working group, we would not be unveiling the WIND project to you all today. And with that, it is now my pleasure to open up a panel discussion with 3 of the scientific and clinical experts guiding the development of WIND. Here with us tonight is Dr. Chris Bowlus, who is the Lena Valente Professor of Medicine and the Chief of the Division of Gastroenterology and Hepatology at the University of California, Davis School of Medicine. His extensive research in autoimmune liver diseases, including the immunopathogenesis of PSC. He chairs the Consortium for Autoimmune Liver Disease with institutions throughout North America. Dr. Gideon Hirschfield holds the inaugural Lilly and Terry Horner Chair in Autoimmune Liver Disease at the University of Toronto and is a professor of medicine. As a clinician scientist, Dr. Hirschfield manages translational and trials-based clinical science with the goal of advancing therapies for patients with inflammatory liver disease, including PSC, that prevent the need for transplantation. And Dr. Cynthia Levy is a professor of medicine and the associate director of the Schiff Center for Liver Diseases at the University of Miami. She was awarded the Arthur Hertz Endowed Chair in Liver Diseases. Dr. Levy's clinical research program focuses on clinical trial development and conduct for autoimmune and cholestatic liver diseases, including PSC, and in the study of porphyrias. Welcome to the three of you. So to get us started, I'd like to ask if you have any reflections on the presentations that you'd like to share.
Who should start? I mean, I'll quickly say, so I think it's great news. I think it's incredibly exciting. You know, it's something that has been talked about for a long time. And I think there's a clear and ongoing need. And if we can execute the aims, then I'm sure this will deliver fantastic information for a long time ahead. So I think it's really welcome news for patients.
I would just follow up on what Gideon said, and that I think this is a natural progression of what's been going over the last 2 decades, you know, in various forms. But this will be just I think a tremendous improvement in the way we've done natural history studies, and will really allow us to, I think, develop the biomarkers that were discussed by Ruth-Anne previously. So very excited about it, sure.
Yeah, me too. So it's really exciting. This is an ambitious project, and I'm really happy it's finally coming, and it's coming to life. And I think the most exciting part is that we're bringing together, this is an international project. It's not just us in the US, not us, North America. We are going abroad, we're improving diversity, we're listening to all our patients, putting this together. This is just really exciting. And the ability to collect the biomarkers is like a dream come true to investigators. So looking forward to this.
I'd add this, it's like a sense of maturity. It's a bit like Chris said, it's many decades, but I mean, you know, we always tended to work by ourselves in our own center, and we're very precious and, you know, proud of our own cohorts, which are very important because we work so hard looking after them. But actually, if you take a step back and you ask the real scientists at the FDA and the scientists in epidemiology, you know, about how you should study disease, this is how you need to do it. You need to have diversity, you need to have size, you need to do it prospectively. It's just so much bigger barrier to do. It's so much harder, but it's worth it.
It's a step up.
It's a step up
that we have been doing.
You have to be patient. It will take time, but it's worth it, because once you set it up, it pays dividends forever.
Excellent, thank you. So one question we have before we get into some more detail is, was there anything that Mary and I missed in our presentations about this initiative that you think we should also discuss before we get into our breakout rooms tonight? Is there anything we missed?
Not really. I mean, I guess the thing that you missed was this should be low impact for patients on a personal level for taking part, but high impact to the community for what the outcomes are. So there's going to be no reason why patients won't want to take part in a well-organized cohort that's prospective. It's not going to harm them in any way. It's all of the things that happen to them are going to be what, you know, their standard of care. So it's like translating what happens to them on a day-to-day basis, but turning it into data that's, you know, really valuable to answer lots of questions. So I think it's a win-win.
No, I don't think you missed it. This is a very, this project involves so many moving points, moving targets. And this meeting, as well as the upcoming meetings that we're gonna have, these are opportunities. So that's how I would word it at this point. Writing this protocol is not an easy task. Coordinating all the goals that you have, all the registries that are already in place, the thoughts of these different investigators throughout the world, this is not an easy task. And incorporating all the requirements from the regulatory agencies so that we can really translate that into a useful output, you know? So this is an opportunity. We wanna hear the patients, we wanna be able to design a protocol that will be doable, that will be feasible, and that will give us a product in return. You know, this is what we need today, buy-in from everybody so that we can complete this project, not just design it. We want to design and complete it with everybody's help.
Absolutely. Dr. Bowlus, anything else that you think we may have missed or want to highlight?
No, I think those are all, agree with the thoughts of what have been said by Gideon and Cynthia. It is a big effort, and it's great to be able to have everybody's input on this, from patients, regulators, investigators, because that's what it's going to take to be successful for sure.
Great, absolutely. So I'll move on to more of a specific question about, one of our goals is to support research and drug development. And let's focus a little bit on drug development for now. So how do you all envision that this shared database will help to accelerate drug development? And I think Gideon, Cynthia, you had mentioned interest in biomarkers, any interest in the external control arm as well for drug development?
All of the above. Right, those are all, and that's why those are our aims. Those are all super important. And bringing this discussion about burden of symptoms and how do we measure them, what is a clinically significant improvement, how do we incorporate them in trials and assess them. This is also very important data. As you said, the instruments are not validated everywhere in every language. We will have to work on that. And that can help clinical trial development. There is a reason why there are so many inequities in clinical trial development. Some places never participate in studies, in part because of the trouble in the difficulties or the challenges in having the instruments in multiple languages, for instance. So that will improve diversity in the population that we can encompass in this study. Yeah, this is really, really important. So we can generalize our results.
And remember, if you're developing a drug and you've got lots of great science and you're trying to work out which drug to sort of invest in, you want to de-risk your approach. And so companies are looking to diseases where there's a lot of information about what happens to patients, what is important to patients, and which patients are the best patients for, trying out new drugs, because developing drugs is really hard, really, really difficult. And then if you want to develop a drug for a rare disease that's progressive but impactful, as a company, you're really mindful of all the rules, and the rules are there for everyone's benefit, efficacy and safety. And those rules are, I read the US newspapers, those are pretty controversial when it comes to approving drugs without endpoints, and it's discussed right up into your, the House of Representatives and Senate as to what are the rules that FDA can use to approve drugs when they haven't proved that they definitely make you live longer, but they seem to work. So from a company perspective, these natural history cohorts with well-curated data are really, really valuable and something that will appeal and be really interesting, because it provides independent data to answer questions of interest to them and of questions to the regulators that make it more likely that they'll lead to a successful implementation of a new therapy that benefits patients. And, individually, a company can't do this by themselves, but collectively, these kind of efforts, pay dividends back handsomely to patients fundamentally, but to the community in a equal manner.
Great thoughts there. And I think one thing that really makes me excited about this project is that it involves so many different stakeholders, and we're all really aiming for the same thing, which is to have new treatments available for PSC patients, and having everyone aligned and on the same wavelength there for this WIND initiative is just very, very exciting. So thank you. So we have sort of discussed a little bit about the importance of the WIND collaboration for the PSC patient community and for now drug developers, and also a little bit for medical and researchers in that community. So would anyone like to share sort of what you envision as the future of research, natural history studies, and questions that we can address using the WIND cohort in the future?
Well, where do you want to start? There's loads of questions.
Exactly.
I mean,
I think that's where you all are thinking of all 100 of them.
Yeah, so I think picking up on what Gideon had just talked about in terms of, developing a pathway for drug development is really critical for PSC. Right now, it's not completely clear what the pathway is, and that's keeping some drug companies out of the market, from preventing them from trying new drugs that might be effective because they just don't see a way to approval. And that's really, I think, central to this initiative is, can we come out at the end with some biomarkers that are validated, acceptable to patients, to investigators, to industry, to regulators, that are good predictors of clinical outcomes, so that if we change those biomarkers, we can reasonably assuredly feel that they will be translated into real meaningful changes in the disease course for patients. And so that's I think the overall goal, number one. And whether we can get that through mining the same sorts of clinical data we've been collecting over the last couple of decades in terms of standard liver tests and biochemistries and blood counts and, imaging, I think is, maybe we should be hopeful that it will happen, but I think that we may need to look into new novel markers. And that's where the biobanking, I think, with this is going to be particularly important. But unfortunately, that's also going to take time. So I think the other thing here is to make sure that we understand that while there will likely be some really great research to come out of this in the short run, in the first few years, we have to be in this for the long haul. As I was saying before, this is kind of a natural extension of natural history studies we've been doing on a collaborative basis for the past 2 decades. And we have to be mindful that this is a process that takes time. And so I think examining new novel biomarkers, to me, is really an important part of this study for sure.
And remember, there's the biomarker side, there's the new drug side, but you just come to clinic and you ask questions or get asked questions by your patients about what does something mean? What does it mean for me if my blood tests are like this, consistently, or if my MRI is like this? And we're getting good, we're pretty good at answering those, but we don't always know the answers robustly as we think. And when you develop these diverse cohorts, you actually get better perspectives to actually answer those questions more accurately and with more confidence. And you sometimes learn new things because you bring in, different patients, different populations, different centers that are seeing things that you're not seeing because you're doing it in a certain way. And you can then actually paradoxically answer questions which seem very perplexing. A question that comes up a lot: what does overlap mean? Well, maybe it means nothing. Maybe in fact it's just part of PSC, and the people who don't treat it, the patients are having exactly the same outcome as the people who are treating it very, very aggressively. And we'll never do a trial in that. But when you bring together all this data, particularly over time, real world, and it's repeated data, you suddenly get the ability, because we'll have access to really top-notch biostatistics, to ask questions that may seem that we know the answer, but in fact we never knew the answer with any certainty. We just thought we knew the answer. And now's our chance to actually find out for sure.
Yeah, I think bringing together what Chris and Gideon mentioned, right? The questions are not new. We have been asking questions. We haven't had the right tools to answer them. We answer the way we can. So we collect our retrospective group of cohorts of patients, right? Some smaller groups have prospective follow-up. We have initiated in North America a prospective cohort, but it takes years to build that. And without resources, it's really hard. And Gideon mentioned at some point a very key word: curated data. So now we're going to have the ability to prospectively and at regular intervals collect this data, and there will be ownership, maintenance of this database, and somebody will be looking and saying, are we entering the right data points? Are we missing data? Let's go back. This patient is missing. Can somebody call them? We'll have resources to be more proactive and maintaining and auditing our own database in real time. We'll collect the hopefully we'll be able to store, be it serum, urine, whatever biospecimen we are going to include in our protocol, and use that to answer questions in the future. As Chris said, it's not now. So we all have to be very patient. There will be some low-hanging fruits that we're going to collect, but the big prize will be years from now. It will advance not only the clinical trial development, but our ability to care for the patients in clinic. Yes, understanding better prognostic markers, all of that. How to individualize the care based on what we learn.
Thank you. Yeah, it certainly will take some time, but it's exciting that the PSC patient researcher community will be able to start taking action really soon, starting in 2023. And unfortunately, we ran out of time for our panel tonight. I appreciate you, the three of you, so much for joining us. Thank you again.
I'd like to thank tonight's speakers, panelists, and co-facilitators for making tonight's webinar such a huge success. And thank you to all the PSC patients and caregivers, medical professionals, and industry representatives who participate in the breakout rooms. I hope you had a great and stimulating discussion with all the multi-stakeholders in your group. So to finish up, main thing I want to say tonight is save PSC Partners Conference dates June 2nd to 5th. As we mentioned last time, unfortunately, it's virtual due to the inconsistencies of COVID. We want to remain safe for everybody. And we're sorry we're really late in getting the agenda out, but when we went from in-person to virtual, we had to start all over again. So watch, the registration will be, and agenda will be live soon. Other reminders, please join the patient registry and mentor program. Listen to our monthly podcasts, visit links to updated COVID-19 and vaccine information. Sign up for our mailing list if you're not on it already. Follow us on social media. We have 2 Zoom rooms coming up. They're always from 6 to 7:30 Mountain. One is for caregivers, spouses, and parents on Tuesday, April 5th. The next is for coping with loss on Wednesday, April 6th. If you're in Canada, feel free to visit their website at pscpartners.org. I'm sorry, visit ours, and then Canadian, pscpartners.canada. And as we said, please, please, please join our patient caregiver conference. Since it's virtual, no one has to travel. It's much easier, even if you're not feeling well. Another exciting thing at our conference, we're going to be launching our International Collaborative Research Network, ICR Network. We will have pre-meetings for the conference. So April 27th, we'll have a pre-conference meetup just to tell everybody casually why this conference is different, how it's going to be, what to expect, how to interact with everybody during the conference. We'll have a newcomer orientation for people who've never been before on Thursday, May 12th, and a virtual platform orientation to tell you all about the various aspects of our virtual platform on Tuesday, May 24th. And I guess the last thing I'd like to say is, again, thank our sponsors for our roadmap initiative, Alvareo, Intercept, Escient, Mirum, and CIMAVE. And thank you again, everybody, for coming tonight. Bye-bye.